Saturday. It's December 21st, 2024, and you are listening to Morning Meeting. I'm Ashley Baker in New York City.
And I'm Michael Aney, also in New York City.
And Michael, what a week it has been. New York, during the holidays, it doesn't get much better than that, but yet in the rest of the world, chaos is afoot yet again. Well, this week in the news, there has been one international story that has been preoccupying our hearts and minds, and that is the shocking leak of Pope Francis's closely guarded autobiography. It was illegally leaked online, and then it was available for more than a week this week. It's really a shock to the publishing world, and we have a wonderful story about it in the issue from Mattia Ferraresi. Don't miss it. But as usual, in a news cycle that often seems like it was designed and built to keep us up at night, airmail is the antidote to all of that, and we have another wonderful issue.
Exactly. First, Jackie Kennedy Onassis was one of the most sought-after women in the world in her day, not just by men who wanted to court her, but by one man in particular, a paparazzo named Ron Galella, who was obsessed with photographing her and would go to any length to shoot her. The writer, Karen M. Dunnick, has a revealing story of what happened when Jackie, eager to protect her privacy, took the photographer to court in 1972. Then, everyone talks these days about quiet luxury. Well, our own Linda Wells will share her thoughts on why quiet restaurants are the true luxury these days. She's got that and much, much more when she joins us. And finally, what would it be like if Sigmund Freud were alive in the age of podcasts? Would he have one? Well, his great-granddaughter Bella Freud does, and she's going to stop by to tell us all about it, as well as her life as a fashion designer. So Ashley, where would you like to begin today?
I think we have to start with Bella Freud, Michael.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I've already recommended Bella Freud's Fashion Neurosis on the podcast before. Our obsession continues. We're going to get her on the morning meeting couch, and we are going to ask her all of the questions that she asks her guests. She's one of our favorite voices in podcasting at the moment. Welcome, Bella Freud.
Thank you so much for having me.
Bella, I live in London as well. Everyone in town is talking about this incredible podcast that you have launched that really takes the world of fashion and puts it in a new language and lexicon. And let's first start with the neurosis part of fashion. You are really leaning into your Freudian background. So tell us a little bit first about your relation to Sigmund Freud and where the concept for fashion neurosis really came from.
Well, I happen to be the great-granddaughter of Sigmund Freud, and in our family, that's not been a thing. I mean, obviously it is a thing, but it hasn't been, something that we've been encouraged to deify or be too preoccupied with. And certainly in my upbringing, it was all about my dad. So that's where my focus was. I mean, I've always been interested in undercurrent and what people think and feel. And I've become more and more into that. And then I've also noticed more and more how little that's shown in the fashion, how people comment on fashion or how they report on fashion. It's the same old boring things like so-and-so was in the front row, blah, blah, blah. So-and-so's a bitch or, it's very flattened. And when you're in it, it's so deep. And the things people do and say and how hard they work and how funny they are in particular, I just thought, God, this is just a dream. I've always loved the code and the shortcuts between people in the world, in the fashion world, and these kind of, this almost alternate language that people have. It's so entertaining. And so I thought, I'd love to write something, but God knows how, because there's so much, It started there, and I read this comic book about Sigmund Freud, and I suddenly understood everything because I couldn't really concentrate on the books. And I'm not stupid or anything. I just couldn't focus in that way when it was presented in a slightly different way in a comic book, which I really like, and I used to read a lot and I get lots of ideas from. I thought, there's a way to show things which are sort of associated with sort of intellectual pursuits or dense copy is a way of showing it. And for myself as well, that, I get it, and then I saw these amazing graphic novels like Proust in a graphic novel. And if you can't be bothered to read the whole thing, you can start reading a comic book and then you can get a taste for something and find a different way in. And so that was the start of it, I think.
Well, I love how you get your first episode, you featured Rick Owens, and Rick is such a thoughtful designer on every level, but you get him into your studio, you put him on the couch, so to speak. And I love how the entire podcast is filmed. Was that always part of your idea? And for fashion, it makes so much sense, right? Because you want to see what these people are wearing. But how did that kind of part of the production come together?
Well, I've always had this, for me, it was always filmed, and I didn't even think of a podcast at first because I wanted to do a chat show, like an old school chat show, but really short, but I couldn't find a platform. So I went on I've been figuring out how to do this since just before we went into lockdown. And then I'd made these teasers and I came up with the couch thing because I thought I need a prop. I need it to be recognizably, oh yeah, it's that, hoping that it would resonate with people. And I thought if I could go traveling with it, I could just have a couch and a chair and people would know what to do. And strangely, now it's happening. When people do lie down, something happens, and something happens to me as well. And it's almost like this space sort of occurs between us and we say things, and it's quite sort of magical in a way. But so I did these trailers and little setups, and I thought, okay, I'll do a podcast, but it must be film because I've always loved film. And I love, I stopped doing fashion shows of my own and I made films at first. I just feel like you can play more with a film. So, and it's so fun, even if people only watch the clips, but they're so full of feeling and they give you more. And I just like the idea that when I did a trailer with Kate Moss, we did a trial ages ago, a few years ago. She did this great thing when she was lying on the sofa and I said, why are you wearing what you're wearing today? And then she said, I wore legs. And it was just so gorgeous. You got this elegant leg going up in the air with her jeans tucked into her boot. And so I wanted to have that, that you could see someone with Rick when he came in, when he rang the bell and I answered the door. And then there was just this angel-like figure in black with his long black hair and his black coat. And when he lay down on the couch, it was just such an evocative moment and full of lots more than you can get, I think, just from audio. But because it's fashion, it's great fun to be able to film it too.
Bella, you've given Michael and I a bit of a complex because we've interviewed so many fashion designers over the years. And it's kind of a known thing among journalists that often they're very difficult interviews. They're really heavily managed by PR and they tend to speak in sound bites and they don't often give you anything really original. And, I've read a million interviews with Rick Owens and heard him speak on television 1,000 times. And you got something out of him from that very first episode of Fashion Neurosis that I've never heard before. And I think that's what's so incredible about, whether you've got Jonathan Anderson or Kristen Scott Thomas or my favorite, Carl Ove Knausgaard.
Yes.
Who's such a brilliant writer. And as he said in the episode, doesn't even necessarily think too much about fashion, at least at the beginning. Or Daphne Guinness, you're getting this incredibly intimate sense of not only their personal style, but the power of style and what it has in our lives. And it's so illuminating to me. Did you know all these people beforehand? Did you have these previous relationships or some of them coming in cold and just like in a therapy session, unloading all of this onto you and to the listeners?
With Rick, I'd met him a few times, but only at parties. So I didn't know him very well. I knew I liked him. I knew that he was so interesting. I just had this feeling I could have a conversation with him. And some people I know much better than others. But it's really about the feeling that we could have a conversation of some kind. And with Rick, I'd seen this little film that Tim Blanks had made for the New York Times of him dyeing his hair with the cat. And then the opera playing. And I just thought, that is so beautiful. And Tim Blanks is such a wonderful, interested person, a brilliant journalist. And I just saw how there was a context in which people would like to tell you a bit more than the usual stuff. And I hope that because of being in that world that, I'm not trying to extract anything. I just want to see what's going on. So it's quite nerve-wracking, because I don't really know. I don't have an agenda. I just hope it works. And, I do my homework as much as I can and see what comes out. It's always quite surprising.
Kate Moss was one of those interviews that you did where, she's one of those people we feel like we know because we've seen her for decades, right? But you really very rarely hear from her. She doesn't do many interviews at all. And I think it was the first time I've ever really heard Kate speak in a long form interview like that, because she normally is somewhat press shy. Was it difficult to convince her, to join you on the couch, so to speak?
Well, surprisingly, when I first came up with the idea and I was making little clips and fiddling about, and I showed her one of them, and she said, I want to do that. Or she said, actually, I've got to do that. I knew she hated being filmed, so I would never have actually asked her because I don't want to ask someone to do something they hate. And so we did this thing ages ago, but I didn't have a microphone. I had one camera and then a sort of other camera, a side shot, and it was really good. And I mean, the thing about her is she's so interesting, but because she doesn't talk much, people outside of the business don't know how clever she is, how she's so funny, how noticing she is. She's incredibly perceptive. She just sees everything. I was just then trying to get her back, and I knew she didn't really want to, but what's so great about her is if she thinks something is a good idea, she will go against her desire not to do it because she wants to be part of something that's good. So I felt very honored by that gesture and kind of also inspired a lot of confidence in me to think, if she likes this, then I'm on to something.
Where do you film all this, Bella? Is this in your home or studio?
Yeah, it's in my home. I kind of hate going. I could easily stay at home for the rest of my life, but because I don't have budget, I don't have anything. I have my home and I knew that it could look good there. I do quite a lot there. And I felt like if anything went wrong, I would know what to do. Also, I knew I had to get the lighting right or I'd never get the people I want on the couch. It's everything. I want people to look good. I don't want to, any arty camera angles. I just want beautiful light to make people feel relaxed so that they don't have to worry about that. So I've got it figured out at home. That's where I do it. It's grounding. And then it's quite nice to welcome someone into my home and onto my couch.
You have a great buzzer too.
It doesn't work very often, but luckily that's for this.
Well, I would talk to you all day and ask you 7,000 questions, but I know Michael's got many burning ones too.
I'm struck, Bella, by what you said a moment ago about preparing for it, as a journalist would, sort of doing your research. And yet there's always, for those of us who've spent time on a couch, there's also, though, going into a session with a therapist and they don't know anything about you and you've got to sort of like start that whole thing. So the depth you bring to the interviews, I think it's a great combination of sort of doing the research of a journalist, the preparation, and then sort of knowing how to build this trust zone with the interviewees. I was going to call them your patients. I just want to say it's no question here, just a tremendous achievements. And I'd also say you're spot on with knowing like the importance of good lighting to create that sense of there's nothing worse than a poorly lit therapist room.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people I know won't watch it because they'll be too sort of paranoid or whatever. But when Zadie Smith, I knew she hadn't listened and I knew she hadn't watched. And then I got this text from her and she said, I'm on the plane drunk and I'm listening and it's really good. So I was so pleased. I completely understand that. I find it surprising what I find myself saying as well in a kind of peculiar way. I find I want to say things, that are probably things I would say, if we were sitting, the two of us in some private place. I mean, they're not, I hate the idea of confessional because I don't want that. It's amazing that in this situation with there's there's two cameramen. And I just like that you find yourself saying things that somehow feel like they need to be said. And there's this great moment and it's somehow connected to do with the subject of fashion and how it, is this caring thing, fashion. It's always presented as vanity, as facile or as shallow, but it's so useful, it has all this stuff available, it's a tool. And so that sort of element is fun and I want it to be fun. I'm not trying to pretend to be a therapist. That would be so awful, but I'm really interested anyway.
Well, Bella, thank you for bringing this podcast and this, way of looking at fashion into our worlds. It's just such an enriching thing to get to experience every week. And, Michael, it's okay if Bella takes our job. Like, we're fine with it, right? Fashion journalists of the world, consider yourselves warned. And then on top of it all, she makes like the world's sexiest suits. So Bella, if we didn't love you, we would absolutely despise you out of envy. But thank you so much for doing what you do and making our world so rich because of it.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be on air, Mel. Thank you.
Where shall we go next?
Well, I think, in terms of revealing things and style, who better to talk to than Karen Dunnick about Jackie Onassis and this fascinating story?
For such a private woman, she had a very public moment, and it was all in the name of taking the paparazzi down. Karen Dunnick is a history professor at Muskingum University in Ohio, and she's also the author of the new book, Our Jackie, Public Claims on a Private Life. Welcome, Karen.
Thanks for having me.
So, Karen, as the world knows, Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis was a fixture of public interest for decades, and in 1972, this really all came to a head in the trial that pitted her against Ron Galella, who was New York City's most unrelenting paparazzo at the time. How did we end up there?
Well, I think that there's a long history of public interest in Jacqueline Kennedy, and from the time she's Jacqueline Kennedy to when she's Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis. And I think, in the aftermath of John Kennedy's assassination, the interest just continues to grow, and speculation about what her next move will be or what she'll do in the future, how she's raising the children, how she's maintaining John Kennedy's legacy, that maintains a lot of public interest. And then when she marries Aristotle Onassis, like maybe that she does that as a way to escape the limelight, and instead it just makes the light shine brighter on her, that there's curiosity about her motivations and about where she's going and with whom. And Ron Galella is just there to seize on that moment and trace her every move, particularly around New York City, but to feed into the frenzy of the interest in Jackie O.
And was this legal? Or what was the legality around it?
Yeah, there is not. It was very loosey-goosey in the world of when she goes to trial, that the legal community or the law as it stands, that there was a lot of openness and consideration about what was actually a right to privacy, and that she's getting into it at this moment and establishing for herself or making a claim that there should be a right to privacy. And the legal community is sort of trying to catch up with what she's articulating as what she sees as her right as a private citizen.
Well, and the irony, of course, is that she had to sacrifice a bit of that privacy to really put herself out there in this trial, right? So take us inside the courtroom.
It was a real treasure for me when I was doing my research, because there are not a lot of places where she really articulates her point of view or her motivations or any justifications. She doesn't really see the need to do that. But then a lot of her testimony is available and is published verbatim in the New York Times or is covered in various other forms of media. And then, of course, the trial transcript was available for me to use, where she goes in and there are testimonials from her children about Galella's pursuit of them, about his language, about his movements, about his familiarity with all of them, and about the fear he struck in them. And she is very articulate in talking about her anxiety in public places when she knows that there's the possibility that he will be there following her and her children.
And where did we find her in 1972?
At that point, she is still married to Aristotle Onassis, was spending a lot of her time in New York City, but then also was in London, was in Paris, was in Greece. The kids were in school. So she's, I think New York City is her home base. And that's where Galella most often would find her.
And this is really, we're also familiar with paparazzi now. We know them. We know the whole industry around it. We know the pros and cons. We know even how it goes. Then we have Princess Diana 30 years later and the role they play in there. And she was really suing because Galella was, in some ways, she might argue, stalking him and really pressing out of her privacy. Was this really the first of its case of its kind, of a celebrity really pushing back like this? And I know she wasn't really a celebrity. She was the former first lady. But how do you see this in the world we live in now, its impact?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I don't know that she's the first person to push back on this. Although, Marlon Brando punches Ron Galella in the face at one point, that there is a lot of pushback from the people that he attempts to chronicle. I do think there is a way, her staking a claim, and I love a point in her testimony where she makes it very clear that if she's walking across Central Park and she's running errands, she's picking up her dry cleaning, that's a private act and it is not newsworthy, and that there is no reason for her to be chased. Or if her children are taking tennis lessons, that is not a newsworthy thing. And I think that there is a way that she, and I can't trace a straight line to it, but is a model of establishing certain boundaries. And I've had conversations about this more recently with people thinking about those who are coming to fame right now. And some students asked me about like Chappell Roan. Is this a person who says, I am this public figure, but there are times where I get to say, and now I'm going into my like private moments, or that there are parameters within which we can live. And I think there is a way to trace it back to her that, when she is doing something newsworthy, if she were going out and campaigning for Ted Kennedy, yes, of course, cover that. Or she lends her celebrity, and I referenced Grand Central. Yes, I will go to that press conference and people will come to cover the conference to save Grand Central because Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis is there. And she's glad for that to be newsworthy. But then these sort of private elements of her life, she establishes or she argues belong to her.
Well, and as you note also, what's interesting about she's on the stand, it's again in a culture where we're doubting the woman, right? She's the one who's saying, I'm afraid for my family. And Galella doesn't have to really prove anything. Even though she's a victim, we're doubting her, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And there was a real familiarity of the telling of that case and talking about Galella's attorney holding up pictures of her smiling and her articulating that that's a defense mechanism, that she knows what Galella wants from her, but the onus being on her to prove that she was afraid of him or to prove that she had not invited this. And I think a lot of people reading this recognize the familiarity of that kind of language about women in public when they are being pursued or, being catcalled or far beyond being catcalled, that there's something sadly familiar about that from the 1970s through until 2024.
Well, Karen, it sounds like, this is just one piece of a fascinating story that's in your fascinating new book, Our Jackie. Thank you so much for sharing it with us.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right. Well, moving on. It's a good one, Michael. I feel like Ron Galella, you would have been a good subject for Ron Galella. He would have appreciated what you do every day.
I don't think so. I think Jackie O would be more his style. But, Jackie O reminds me of Linda Wells.
Oh, yes, indeedy. And on that note, we've got another great issue of Airmail Look. And Linda, our fearless editor, is here to tell us all about it. Linda was the founding editor of Allure magazine, a role she held for 25 years. And she's also the beauty and wellness columnist at Airmail and the editor of Airmail Look, which if you are not getting it, you need to get it immediately. All right. Welcome, Linda.
Well, very happy to be here, as always.
Linda, your look from here and the new issue of Airmail Look, I think will make all of our listeners feel both heard and seen. You are addressing this perplexing topic of noise in restaurants. Where did this idea come from for you?
Well, it came from life, as some things tend to do. I keep going to restaurants and they're louder and louder and louder. And of course, I'm old, so maybe that's my problem. But then I talk to people who are in their 20s and 30s and they say they're going completely mad. They cross restaurants off their list. And it's so cacophonous. And it's not relaxing. And what you really want to do is have a conversation when you're at dinner. But instead, you're getting a concert by the chef or the owner's choice. And all the surfaces are really hard. And I think everything changed. We used to go to those old-fashioned French restaurants, and they were all cushioned and carpeted and tablecloth and everything else, and they've all disappeared pretty much. And now they were replaced with these cool places that have wood tables and no tablecloths and hardwood floors and, cove ceilings, and it's just the noise is bouncing off of everything. And then Mario Batali, who owned Babbo, among other places, changed the whole scene by putting on Led Zeppelin and his hard rock choices in the dining room. And that was really great. If you worked there before service started, you would get you all psyched and energetic and you'd have a great time. But once you're trying to have a conversation over that, it just becomes a war.
And what's behind this, Linda? Are they trying to create a vibe at the expense of our hearing?
Yes, they're definitely trying to create a vibe. Nobody wants a quiet restaurant. It's uncool to have a quiet restaurant. And I get that. But somewhere between a concert and a library is the happy medium that we all need.
Well, and I wonder too, I mean, we know so much about how one's hearing can be easily damaged, right? I mean, and that can cause all sorts of health implications later in life.
That's right. Once hearing is damaged, you don't get it back. But it happens really gradually, which is why a lot of people don't recognize that they can't hear. And some people think they're in denial, and maybe some of them are because nobody wants to wear hearing aids. But part of it is just that it happens so gradually but the numbers have gone up. Adolescents, 31% increase since the 90s of adolescent hearing loss. So it's not just for people over 65, although it is more pronounced in people over 65. And then the health dangers associated with hearing loss include increase in dementia, social isolation, loneliness, reduced activity. There's some association with Alzheimer's. There are more falls with people who have hearing loss, greater diabetes. So it's really a big health problem.
Okay, so Linda, on that note, the bad behavior continues with the return of social smoking. Danielle Pergament has a great story in the issue about that.
Yes, there is a return to social smoking, but it's not nationwide, and the numbers are not showing overall increases, but it's the fashion set. The trendy people are sneaking their cigarettes and glamorizing it. And you see this on Instagram, and there's an Instagram handle called Sigfluencers, and it's all these glamorous pictures of people smoking. And people think if they just have a cigarette, one at a party every once in a while, it's okay. And some people are even pairing their cigarettes with their green juice. It's a small but kind of trendy problem.
Now, it wouldn't be an issue of Airmail Look if we didn't at least explore some kind of sexual preoccupation. In this month's issue, it's ethical non-monogamy. First of all, what is that?
I think it's called an open relationship that everybody agrees upon. But I'm reading about it too. So Lauren Bands, the fantastic writer and reporter, talks about this trend and how it's so complicated to have relationships these days. And there are all these, polycues and the rules of polycues and all the terminology and everything that everyone just gets exhausted. So her proposal is to just bring back good old-fashioned affairs. And wouldn't that be nice? You could have a cigarette and your affair at the same time if you're going to go retro.
Yeah, it's a very old school issue that we've got going on.
Right.
But we do have some incredible development right in the realm of plastic surgery, this extreme body makeover approach that's pioneered by a New York City plastic surgeon. What exactly is going on with this 4-week-long recovery he requires?
Oh my gosh, there's a doctor, and I think more and more doctors are doing this, but this doctor's name is Dr. Nystan, and he does a full body makeover. It started kind of as the mommy makeover, which I always hate that terminology because it sounds so infantile. And it also kind of cutesifies something that maybe shouldn't be cutesified because it's surgery and there are lots of risks that go with it. And there are more risks with this surgery because it's really complicated. It involves usually a body lift, which means that your abdomen or your waist is divided almost all the way around and then tugged up like a tight pair of jeans. So that's your body lift part. And then it's accompanied by tastefully small implants and sometimes a breast lift. So it's a real body makeover, and the people who receive it are thrilled to pieces, but they can't stand up straight for 2 weeks afterward. And now the trendy thing that he's doing is he's included in the price of the body lift, which starts at around, or the mommy makeover, which starts at around $75,000, is a stay for recovery at the Plaza Hotel. And now in the New York Post, they talk about how he's throwing in Carbone. So you can get Carbone delivered to you. And I think, who wants that after you've just had a body lift and you can't stand up straight? You're going to sit in bed and have, rigatoni alla vodka? That sounds disgusting to me.
We talk about lots of self-improvement and things are too loud, and I'm thinking it's coming up on the new year and people start to make resolutions. And you got a great story, which also intersects with, I think, what recently came out as the word of the year, brain rot. And that's about people spending too much time on their phone. I know this year, I sort of swore off Instagram for the last 6 months. So you've got a fascinating story about detoxing, that sort of digital detox, but a very pricey one. Can you tell us about it?
Yes. A Gen Z writer went to a clinic in Switzerland where they charge upwards of $50,000. It's a rehab clinic, and they take care of the usual rehab, alcohol, drugs, all the usual, with very high profile patients who are shuttled in through a secret entrance. But she was there for phone addiction, and she just stayed 4 days to test it out, but they took away her phone and they gave her all kinds of crafts to do, and they gave her psychotherapy to stop the adrenaline rush that comes to her with the phone and the immediate grabbing of it. And it didn't cure her, but it really did help her habit a lot. It's an extreme measure.
These are extreme times.
Yeah, right. Right.
Linda, there's no hope for us. I mean, can you imagine if we went away for a week and couldn't check our phones? I feel like the world would implode, or maybe it's just our computers or the Airmail Look newsletter operation.
Or maybe our egos and our desire to be needed. Either way, mine is too fragile. I can't do that.
Linda, great issue. Thank you so much. We love talking to you, and we'll see you again soon for the January one.
Well, and Ashley, great issue to you too. And Michael too.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Great to be with you.
Happy holidays.
There's only one place to discover a global snapshot of the current cultural scene. Airmail's Arts Intel Report. Our international research tool for what to do and where and when to do it is user-friendly, continuously updated, and meticulously curated. Arts Intel is handy at home, on the road, and when you're planning your next trip. It also includes indispensable lists of restaurants and hotels in key cities around the world, recommended by our well-traveled experts. Explore Arts Intel at airmail.news/arts-intel, and be sure to sign up for our Week in Culture newsletter, which is published every Wednesday afternoon at airmail.news/WIC. I'm Chris Garrett, an Airmail Deputy Editor, and I never leave home without it. Bon voyage.
Michael, what would you do without Look in your life? I really worry about it.
I do too. I'm like I say, it's not just for the ladies, it's for everyone. Great stories.
Well, speaking of stories, we've talked a lot this weekend, but I know you have something you can recommend to us.
I do. Have you seen the movie September 5?
I have not. Tell me.
Okay, so this is a new movie. It's in theaters now, and it tells the story of the 1972 Munich Olympics terrorist massacre, in which 11 Israeli athletes and coaches were taken hostage and killed by the Black September group of Palestinians. And it seems like, when you first say, how dramatic can this be? But it's a terrific, as what we call a TikTok in journalism, it's sort of like minute by minute. And it looks at how these guys at ABC Sports, led by Roone Arledge and Jim McKay and other people in real life, found themselves covering what they thought was going to be the Olympics and then thrust into covering an international tragic news event. It's got a terrific cast. Peter Sarsgaard is in it, among other people. It's one of those things that makes you feel like you're right inside this control room as they're making these second-by-second decisions. I thought it's a terrific film. Probably sure to get nominated for a lot of awards coming down the pike. It's called September 5 or September 5th, I'm not sure which, but one of those great taut media procedurals revisiting the Munich Olympics and that tragedy. So it's in theaters now. And you, my dear, what do you have for us?
As we've discussed, it's the season to get to the theater, and I know that, have you seen Honora yet?
I have not seen Honora yet. Have you seen it?
Yeah, it's wonderful. So it's this new film from the director Sean Baker, and you probably know him from The Florida Project. It's probably his best known film, but it's a really great movie. It's about a woman named Honora who's a sex worker. She's from Brooklyn, and she has her own kind of magical moment when she meets the son of a Russian oligarch, and the two fall in love and get married. And then, of course, his parents find out all the way back in Russia, and things start to unravel. But it's a really wonderful movie. It's kind of a rom-com, which, we love those, but it's definitely a really fresh take on it, and I really recommend it. It's called Honora. It's directed by Sean Baker, and it is out in theaters now, and it will be streaming somewhere eminently. I don't know where yet, but it'll happen. And that's all I got.
Okay.
On that note, Michael, well, thank you all so much for joining us. We wish you a marvelous weekend. Michael, will you please read us out?
Morning Meeting is produced by Airplay Productions and edited by Jesse Cannon. Our coders are Graydon Carter and Alexander Stanley. Our chief operating officer is Bill Keenan. And our deputy editors are Ashley Baker, Chris Garrett, Nathan King, Julie Vitale, and Ash Carter. Our CMO is Emily Davis, and our music supervisor is Randall Poster. The theme music is The Cute Monster by the Buddy Collette Quintet. A new edition of Airmail is published every Saturday, so please subscribe and enjoy all of our stories on airmail.news, which we update every day. You can also find us on Twitter and Instagram at Airmail Weekly. We will be back here next Saturday with another edition of Morning Meeting, but in the meantime, be sure to subscribe to Spotify or Apple Music. But most of all, thanks again for joining us.